Good people of a great nation, I welcome you to the discussion segment of Development Focus with Jide Ojo on ITV this morning. Like I promised you when we had the opening session, I did say that we are going to be having two very, very important personalities, and they are all here with us. So the first segment, I'll be talking with a very notable Nigerian, one that eminently qualifies as a very, very important personality. Dr. Tive is almost an household name here in Abuja. I don't know for the entire country. But when you talk about civil society, you talk about, a leadership coach. Currently is the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Senate President, distinguished Senator Obieh Omagege. Dr. Tive, you are welcome on my show.
Thank you, Jide, for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I always want my guests to introduce them because I don't want to do a disservice to the introduction. I know you wear many caps, and I've known you for over 20 years. But then, let our viewers meet you. What exactly are you? You have so many things rolled into one.
Well, like you correctly stated, my name is Otive Ibuzo. I come from Orogun in Ugari North Local Government area of Delta State. I originally studied pharmacy. I practiced pharmacy for some years and then studied public administration and international relations. I have a PhD in public administration. And I've worked as a pharmacist. I've worked in civil society. I've done some private business, and I'm the founding executive director of the African Center for Leadership Strategy and Development. I've taught in some schools in Delta State University, Lagos Center. Currently, I teach at the Nigerian Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies, and I'm Chief of Staff to the Deputy President of the Senate.
So how do you get time to do all of this? You are also a pastor. You didn't tell us about that. You are also a politician, anyway, an aspirant, former aspirant to the Delta State governorship seat. So how do you manage your time to deal with all of this?
I think that everyone, you will have time for what you consider to be important. So for me, it's priorities. There are many things people do which I consider as time robbers, which I don't engage in. So my life is woven around service, work, and faith. So
do you have time to relax at all? Do you spare time to
Yes, I relax, but for some of us, taking a good book and reading is relaxation for me.
You are also an author. You have also authored a number of books.
I've written a number of books. I plan to write at least 20 volumes in following the footsteps of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. I've already written 10 volumes already, and I have 10 to go.
Anyway, this is not this is just for my viewers to know who. When I say you are a very, very important personality, I mean every word of that, because you are a learning encyclopedia. Somebody should learn. And I've been under some of your presentations. You are one expert in strategic planning, and you've done that for quite a number of institutions and government and all of that. How important is strategic planning to our environment?
Well, when we set up the African Center for Leadership Strategy and Development, it was a realization that for the whole of Africa, there are 3 basic problems: leadership failures, inappropriate strategies, and wrong development approaches. So strategy and strategic planning is very important, both for individuals for organizations and nations. Unfortunately, many people live their lives aimlessly. So you see people with capacity, with content, but because of lack of strategic focus, they end up as failures. You see many organizations, you know, who have potentials, but they are not able to utilize these potentials because there is no strategic plan. Because what does strategic plan help you to do? So I help you to do 4 things. First, you look at the mandate of the organization. And for individual, the reason why you are created, the divine agenda of God for you. Secondly, you look at organization. How do you structure things? How do you put the resources? How do you put the people? How do you put the materials in order to achieve the purpose for which the organization is set up? Thirdly, you look at the environment, both internal environment and external environment of operations, and you look at all of this and say, given the environment, not to lament about environmental challenges, but how can you work on the environment so that the environment will work in your favor to achieve your mandate? And then finally, you look at what strategic moves, given your mandate, given the organization, and given the environment in which you are operating, what strategic moves do you need to make in order to achieve your objective? That's why I mentioned earlier that for me, you know, there are many things people spend their time on. But if you know your divine agenda, what God, if you know your destiny, if you know your purpose in life, you organize your life around those purposes. For instance, I'm not an actor, and I'm not a producer, so I spend minimal time watching films, you know. I'm not a footballer. I don't invest in football. So, you know, I will only wait for the result unless Nigeria is playing. So all those time that people spend on those things, I spend them in others. I've written 10 books, 10 volumes, in addition to journal papers and other monographs and pamphlets. How do I do this? Each time for over a period of 20 years, when I come back from work, you know, by 5, 6, 7 p.m., I will study till 12 midnight before I sleep. And for over 20 years, I go to bed 12, I wake up 6 a.m. 6 hours. So my body has even adjusted to sleeping for 6 hours.
Interesting, interesting. Now, you rose to become country director of ActionAid International, actually in Nigeria, and you were the country director for some years. And that's after your stint at CDD, that's Center for Democracy and Development, which is where our party initially crossed. All of these, and your activism, you are also an activist. You are a feminist, you are a comrade, you can even be said to be a labor leader, or you know, somebody who is into unionism sort of.
Absolutely.
What has all of this brought to bear on your person, and what lessons can Nigerians learn from that?
Thank you very much. You know, growing up as a young person, 2 things have shaped my life. One is when I got to University of Benin as a young student, I was introduced into Marxism by joining the League of Patriotic Students. So my whole world outlook, you know, my not looking at money as anything, my sacrificial attitude to life, my commitment to the collective and not the individual, my, you know, fighting for the poor and excluded in society, even though by His grace I've risen and jumped from poverty, is all based
on that ideology that I imbibed, you know. And then the second most important thing that have shaped my life is acceptance of Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And you know, it took me like 4 years to reconcile Christianity and Marxism. And for me, the only basic difference is that with, you know, all the characteristics, all the expectations of a Marxist, discipline, commitment, you know, accepting others as better than you, are all the same principles of Christianity. The only difference is faith. So these are the two things that have shaped my life. And so whether I do business, whether I serve in government, or whether I do civil society work, these are the two things that have shaped my life. And I think there are a lot of lessons to learn from it. I come from a humble background. I've never said that I come from poor background, because my parents were not poor in integrity and ideas. And in any case, there was no day that we went to bed hungry. There was food. I grew up in the village, even though I was living in a mud house, and my bed was mud that was molded by the side of the wall with mat on top. And when you wake up every morning, you see marks of mat on your faces. But with education, I was able to rise and, you know, move away out of poverty, and even help many members of my family to move away out of poverty. That's what education can do. So one lesson is that education is a leveler. Education can transform. Education can move you from poverty into prosperity. The second lesson is really that when you are living on your life, be strategic. Engage in those things. And when I say be strategic, you can divide life into 3 parts. The learning stage from 0 to 25, the earning stage from 26 to 50, and the enjoying stage from 51 to 75 plus. And each of these stages, there are strategic things that you need to focus on. In learning stage, you focus on your study, you focus on learning skills. In earning stage, you focus on raising family, saving money, making investment, building your house, so that by the time you are 60, you know, you are not doing school run. You are not paying rent. If God helps you, and then your life at the later part will be better than the beginning, as the Bible clearly tells us in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 18. So for me, life is good and simple, because if you really look at it, especially for those people in middle class, what you require to survive in Nigeria is so small if you are in middle class, in terms of food, in terms of shelter, in terms of movement. But it's the greed of people that is killing many people. And once you have this attitude to life, you live a perfect life, you live a wonderful life, you live a life of impact, and you live a life that will leave a lasting legacy for other generations.
Thank you very much. I allowed you to give us your perspective of life, because I believe people can learn a lot from how you rose from grass to grace, and you know, to this level. But this is not about you, it's about our system. You agree with me that we are having severe good governance deficit. What is the cause?
Well, if you look at good governance as a concept, governance generally is the exercise of political, economic, and administrative authority within a system, and all the mechanism and institutions that go with it. We are having good governance deficit for many reasons. You can put it broadly that it is because we don't have, over the years, for many reasons, we don't have an accountable responsive, and capable government. On the one hand,
accountable,
responsive, and capable government on the one hand, and on the second hand, we don't have engaged and active citizenry. Because to have good governance, you have both the supply side and the demand side.
Sure.
And why are we having governance deficit? If you look at government, you look at even the history of government in Nigeria, you see that it comes from the colonial regime, and they handed over power to a certain kind of leaders in Nigeria who have not been able to even, leave that colonial mentality. And even the citizens, what was imbibed into the citizens is to see government as alien. So government in Urhobo language is Ilworo Igbo. Government in Igbo language is Orwo Igbo. Government in Hausa language is Aiki Nasara. So all of this, literal translation is white man's job. So if you go from the village to a white man's job, and you are able to take white man's money and bring it back to the village, you are rewarded with chieftaincy title. But if you steal the community money, you are ostracized from the community. This was beautifully elaborated by Professor Peter Eke in the theory of two publics. So there is the primordial public where people operate, you are honest, you can't eat community money, and then there is the bureaucratic public where if you go to government, you steal money, it's nobody's money. And over the years, because of the way colonialism was organized, because of the way they handed over power, we always have leadership deficits. In fact, especially political leadership. I've argued recently that if you look at many sectors, in the UN, you have a Nigerian as the Deputy General Secretary of the UN. In the World, Amina Mohammed. In the World Trade Organization, you have Ngozi Iweala, a Nigerian, as the Director General. If you look at the business world, you have leading Nigerians like Aliko Dangote, Tony Elumelu, and many people. If you go to the academic world, you have leading Nigerian professors everywhere. If you go to the NGO world, you have leading Nigerians, international organizations everywhere. If you go to labor, it's a Nigerian that is the president of the World Labor Body, Comrade Ayuba Waba. But when you come to politics, just mention the names of the leaders, even at the national, state, and local government levels, you will see that we bring the worst among us into political leadership. And political leadership is so important. When we talk about good governance as a matter of exercise of political, economic, and administrative authority, you find out that it's the political leadership that is omnibus. The political leadership influences all others. But unfortunately, for many reasons, we've left politics for the less endowed in the country. We've refused to abide by the counsel of Aristotle, or Plato, who said that if you refuse to participate in politics, you will be ruled by your inferiors. So what we have seen in Nigeria is that many decent people, many godly people have seen politics as a dirty game. They have allowed politics to be dominated by people who are not our first 11, and the result is the governance deficit that we have, which you already talked about.
Now, it's good that you are drawing the linkages. You sit there as a chief of staff to the deputy president of the Senate. What does your role? What does it? What are your scope of work as chief of staff?
Yeah, the chief of staff to the deputy president of the Senate, and in fact, chief of staff generally, the first and major role is that you are responsible for all the staff working in the office of the deputy president of the Senate. Number two, you are the chief advisor to the deputy president of the Senate. You ensure that you make the arrangement for appointments, people who to see him and who not to see him. So it's actually a very challenging job, and then you organize all the staff. So as deputy president of the Senate, who is the legislator, the major work of legislator is representation, lawmaking and oversight. But as deputy president, he performs an additional role of leadership. So you organize the entire office, with structures and people to be able to perform all of this office. When I got to the office, one of the shocking things that I received was that there was no handover note, there was no document, there was nothing whatsoever. So the first thing I did was to get people who have done the work before, people who have engaged with the office before, and then we did a history of the office of the deputy president of the Senate, starting from 1999 to date, and then we did a strategic plan of how to perform the office of the deputy president of the Senate, and we organized the office into 6 departments and 26 units. So as of today, we have a structure, we have people, we have a strategic plan, and by the time I'm exiting in 2 years' time, whoever is taking over for the office will have documented a strategic plan that they can learn from. So it's a very interesting position. You can influence things. You can, be able to support the deputy Senate president. And one of the major roles of the deputy Senate president is the review of the 1999 Constitution. And as you know, it's an area that I've worked in since 1999 and returned to CFCR. Citizens Forum for Constitutional Reform. So we've been able to support the deputy Senate president, look at what are the key issues, what are the priorities for constitutional review, and we've really looked at it, even though we are taking a piecemeal approach. From 1999 to 2011, when we wanted to do a holistic review of the 1999 Constitution, we're not successful. And so we decided to, as a country, when I say we, to do a piecemeal approach. But even though it's a piecemeal approach, this 9th Assembly is taking a lot of issues, either in terms of women's rights or in terms of the Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which is not justiciable, or in terms of indigency and citizenship rights, or in terms of strengthening the political system, strengthening the judiciary. One challenge we have today in the country is judicialization of politics, where judicial officers determine who becomes the political leaders. We have cases where even the people who have very few votes in Zamfara became the representative, by the pronouncement of court. So these are all the issues that, and it's a very interesting and challenging job, but the office, we're trying our best.
Okay, now you've run us through your 2 years and the achievement or scorecard, which is very impressive, that at least you have been able to bring shape and form, procedure and structure into the office of the deputy Senate, president of the Senate. But there is a raging controversy about the electoral reform, and I know how passionate you are about that because we belong to the same constituency. So now there was a technical committee. I don't know whether it's quadripart or tripartite. There is Office of Attorney General, the Senate, House of Reps. I don't know whether INEC was there. I know maybe civil society was there. And you had a technical committee that have worked for 2 years on this issue of electoral reform. We are told it will be passed in December 2020. It didn't happen, maybe because of COVID-19. We are told, okay, expect it first quarter of 2021. It didn't happen. They said, okay, second quarter of 2021, it didn't happen. Now we were told that on or before next week, by next week, it's going to happen. But there is a raging controversy that the work of the technical committee that was agreed upon, some people somewhere have gone to doctor it and introduce additional clauses that were not there at the that were not agreed at the technical meeting. And let me give you a couple of those. One is the issue that bans INEC from electronic transmission of results. There was also the one that talks about INEC having the power to review the result of a returning officer that was under duress to make a declaration, as we saw in Imo in 2019. And I watched distinguished Senator Kabiru Gaya and Honorable Solomon from House of Reps yesterday on one of our sister stations. And it will seem like, it's a perception I have watching them, that the Senate seems to have maybe gone behind to review what the technical committee have agreed upon. Because distinguished Senator Gaya was like, okay, yes, we made those suggestions, but it is the plenary that will accept or reject. But the honorable member from House of Reps was saying, no, this was not agreed at the technical meeting. And we had the Speaker of House of Reps saying, look, he was not aware of all this. No, this to me is a throwback to 2001, when we had 2001 Electoral Act, and some people smuggled certain things into it, and it was rejected, and we had 2002 Electoral Act. As an insider, what did you think happened that we are now hearing about two versions of the same bill?
Okay, thank you very much. Like you noted, the Electoral Act is taken very seriously by all Nigerians, especially by the political class. You will notice that if you analyze the 4 alterations that have been made to the Constitution, many of them were on electoral matters.
Sure.
And for the past 2 years, there have been debates and discussion on the Electoral Act. I read about it just like you, about the circulating versions and the allegations that some things have been smuggled into it. I think that, there's a process there's a legislative process. Now, when they do all of those things, it will come in form of a bill, which will be gazetted, until we see that official gazette. All these insertions are just speculations, and they will be of no effect until the gazetted copy comes out. Secondly, let's even assume if there are all those insertions, I'm sure the legislators are listening and seeing the responses of Nigerians to those issues. You mentioned 2 of them. There's even an additional one, the one of increase in the funding, in the spending limit
from 1 billion for president to
15 billion. But what I want to say is that, look, let's look at the bill in its holistic perspective. It will seem as if these are the only 3 things in the bill.
No, there are over 200.
Absolutely. There are beautiful provisions in the bill. Remember, one of the mischief that the bill seeks to cure is this issue of card reader, which was said to be illegal. Remember the challenges that gave to us. All of those things will be solved by this bill. My own advice is that, look, today, you can't make any law through just smuggling in any any provisions. It will be debated on the floor. There will be a clause-by-clause consideration before the law will be finally passed. So civil society, media, even the individual legislators to be on guard, because this is a very important law, and I'm confident that at the end, what will come out will be what will advance democracy in Nigeria.
I want to share your optimism, but I'm worried. I'm worried on the fact that, I mean, it's not the first time, but we have a very beautiful working relationship. This Ninth Assembly decided to have joint committee on electoral reform, and they work together harmoniously thus far, inviting, they have undergone public hearing, they've harvested thoughts, they've had about 4 retreats that I know of. I don't know any other technical sessions, many of them that have been held. And one would have expected that. Now, I'm worried against the background of, if the version passed by the Senate is different from the version passed by the House, there will be the need for a conference committee. And here you are, by the agenda of the National Assembly, on 14th of July, they are proceeding on their annual vacation, which will be for 3 months. By the time they are back from that vacation, they are going to be receiving the budget 2022. And the moment you start having, even if there is a conference committee, like on PIB now, there is a conference committee that has been set up yesterday. If there is a conference committee, will the bill not still be brought back to be passed by the 2 assemblies after that? Can't we avoid this time wasting by ensuring that the 2 houses pass the same legislation, and this is sent to the president? Luckily, we are told that the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice was represented in the committee. So even if it's reference to them, there is likely not going to be any objection. INEC possibly as representative in the technical committee, if it is sent to them, because I know the workings of the bureaucracy is that the president will send the bill that is sent to him to those relevant agencies that will
for their comments.
Yep. And that's why in 2018 we have the same bill passed 4 times and the president never assented to it once. The last one, he said it was too close to election. So I believe that if we are able to, maturity and wisdom prevails between now and next week, that this will be considered, and making sure that both the leadership make sure that it's the same version of the bill they passed, so there will be no need for conference committee. It's going to expedite our work in civil society, because then we will not have to be waiting on the president. I mean, we know that the next pressure point will be for the president to assent to it, so that we can start running and INEC can start planning for 2023, knowing full well that there could be alterations to its own strategic plan that it has. But the feelers we are getting now is really very ominous. But I know you are the bureaucrat.
No. I think that you are right to say that it would have been better, quicker, if they both agreed and passed the same version. But it's not always like that. And that's why it's democracy. And that's why it's 2 houses. But what I can assure you is that the legislators are very, very conscious of the fact that they are running against time. And this Ninth Assembly, we may criticize the Ninth Assembly for many reasons, but one of the things they've able to demonstrate is ability for quick turnaround and deliver on some challenging legislation. You remember the legislation on the offshore dichotomy that brought a lot of money to the legislation on the Finance Act, legislation on minimum wage, legislation on PIB, even though there are still some gray areas. But PIB for 20 years was never passed, So I'm sure that they are conscious of the time, and the issues that are arising from it, they will deal with it. They've dealt with that in many ways in the past. They've had what do you call it, holiday fix, and shifted it to do some things in the past. And so let's see what happens. This is going to be a very busy week anyway, and they have made a commitment that they want to pass the electoral act before going. So let's see what happens.
So now on the constitutional amendment, which your principal is chairing, the office of the Deputy Senate President, or Deputy President of the Senate, as is appropriately called, what is the timeline for us to see those alterations?
Well, initially, you know, the plan was to ensure that the National Assembly will complete its own work before going on recess. But it's quite clear that that is no longer possible. But nearly all the bills are ready. So
how many bills do we have altogether now?
We cannot say exactly how many, but there are many bills. What we can say is that the bills affect many aspects. They're going to bring about more women participation. There are possibility of affirmative action coming. There are going to be bills on indigenship.
These are individual bills.
Yes,
like
yes.
Senate
did it. Yes, okay. They are going to be individual bills. They are going to be bills on participation of young persons in terms of appointment. There are going to be bills on strengthening the judiciary. There are going to be bills on strengthening INEC. So it's very elaborate, covering very wide-ranging subjects.
Okay.
There are going to be bills on devolution of powers. In fact, the argument now is
police.
Yes, there are going to be bills on state police. You know,
yes.
Yeah. So it's the clamor for restructuring. Most of the issues are already being addressed at the constitutional review. Whether it will go as far as Nigerians want is what we'll see.
Let's come back before we open the phone lines, because this is an interactive program. Let's come back to this issue of good governance. People are saying there is no inclusive governance in Nigeria. Do you agree with this opinion?
Yes.
So, if yes, what are the manifestations and how do we deal with it?
When people say there are no inclusive governance, what they are saying is that, you know, if democracy is about the people taking decisions, you see that in most cases the electorate only participate during elections. In between elections, there's no participation. You will see that poor people are excluded because they cannot afford the campaign expenses. You see that women are excluded. The percentage of women in parliament in Nigeria is one of the lowest in the world.
Even PWD
it's less than 6%. The average for Africa is 25%. In Rwanda, the percentage of women in parliament is 68%. In South Africa, in Eritrea, in Uganda, is all more than 30%. So that's why we can say that yes, there is exclusion. But remember what I said about the two legs of good governance: the state, the accountable, responsive and capable state, and then engaged and active citizenry. You know, so in order to deal with the challenges of exclusion, government need to put policies in place. Government need to bring things. But on the other hand, citizens need to become more active and make demands upon government and insist on those demands being met. So these are the challenges that we see.
So now, how do we ensure or enhance good governance? Because it's all about governance. People are less concerned about where the leaders are from. Yes, I know when we talk inclusivity, where there is this issue of rotational presidency, there is this issue of power sharing and all of that. But to what ends? If the ordinary citizen like you and I, you are not among us, if ordinary citizen like me is not feeling the impact, because you have moved to the Noverici now, I hope I could join you in the soonest possible time. But Nigerians are hungry, they are angry, they are not feeling governance. And you know, that is why we are having rising insecurity, rising unemployment, rising poverty. So what are your own solutions before we open the phone lines?
You know, Jide, your appearance, your heart, your time.
No, this is packaging, you know.
Is that
it's
of
for the media.
Is that of the Comprador bourgeoisie? So you cannot.
This is for the media.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, you know, how do you enhance good governance? You know, you can look at it from two perspectives. First, how do you enhance the government accountability, responsiveness, and capability? So accountability of every governance is determined by four main issues. One, the mechanisms within the executing agencies in terms of the financial regulations, the policies and procedure, the administrative authority, how it's exercised and followed. Two is legislative oversight. Three is citizens and media monitoring. And there are many tools that citizens can use. And then four, independent organization, independent commissions like Auditor General, Accountant General, like, you know, that anti-corruption agency that ensures those accountability. In terms of responsiveness, governments being able to respond to demands from both the legislator and the executive. And then in terms of capability, in fact, capability starts from the ability of government itself to raise taxes. You know, Nigerian government, or Nigeria is one country where you have the lowest rate of people paying taxes. So government capacity to raise revenue, government capacity to be able to utilize this revenue, government capacity to appoint the right kind of people, and ensure that the mechanism, systems, and institutions are working. That's on the government side.
Let me pause you, because we need to ask our callers to join us. You can call in on 0809-987-1989. The number is on your screen. You can call in to ask Dr. Otive Igbuzo any question or make your comment on this program. 0809-987-1989. That's the number to call. We can take one or two calls before we call it a wrap on this segment.
Then on the citizen side, you know, you need to have engaged and active citizenry. In fact, that is why, if you look at the last 15 years, two countries have demonstrated what an enlightened leadership and pressure from citizens from below, active citizens, can do. In China, within a period of 15 years, they were able to lift 730 million people out of poverty. And India, within a period...
Let me pause you, sir. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, please tell us quickly your name and where you are calling from. And move away from your TV set.
My name is Ben Akpa. I'm off my television.
Okay.
My name is Ben Akpa, calling from Galadima.
Okay, Akpa.
Yes, sir, Akpa.
Akpa, okay. From Galadima. Yes, what's your question? Very quickly.
Sir, it concerns the electrical amendment.
Electoral amendment, yes.
Yes. Sir, if you use, they say you use electronic to vote, and they are not using electronic to transfer the result. So that means they have to, instead of them to do that, they have to leave it. What you use electronic to vote, and you cannot electronic to transfer. That means something is missing there.
Yeah, Dr. Otive has said that we should not split too much headache on that. That the lawmakers are listening, they are watching, they have seen the uproar, and they will do the right thing. So let's hope for the best that they will allow for electronic transfer of results when they debate on it next week. Thank you very much for your expressing your concern. Thank you. So you can call in. The number is on the screen at 0809-987-1989. So you were talking of engaged citizenry. You cited the example of China, and then India.
India were able to, within a period of 15 years, lift 170 million people out of poverty. So the two of them, India and
Nigeria, is planning to
China,
lift 100 million people.
I think it's from that inspiration that Nigeria is thinking of lifting.
Hello, sorry. Hello, tell us your name and where you are calling from. Move away from your TV set.
Gabriel.
Gabriel?
Yes.
From where?
Okay, this is Gabriel Edwin.
From where?
Edwin, calling from Abuja. From Abuja.
Okay, where in Abuja?
Yes.
What is your question? Very quickly.
Look very precisely. Gabriel Edwin in the book.
I've heard you. What is your question or comment? What is your question or comment? Oh, I think we lost that call. Edwin, you can call back you have 30 seconds. You can still call back before we call it a wrap. Sorry, we have to listen to the people at home.
Yes, so I was saying that, it's probably from the inspiration of China and
that Nigeria is also talking of
lifting
50. Let's take
100 million people.
Hello? Oh, we lost that.
That Nigeria is hoping to lift 100 million people out of poverty within 10 years. But, you have to look at how did China and India, what did they do? Is enlightened leadership and pressure from below. And they specifically implemented social protection policies.
Okay, social protection. Let me pause you, sir. Hello? Yes, what's your name and where are you calling from? Move away from your TV set. Yeah, Chinedu Oko, where are you calling from? AK, Chinedu AK. Where are you calling from, sir?
I'm calling from Abuja.
Okay, what's your question? Very quickly, 30 seconds.
No, I would have liked our presenter there use an example that's very close to us. That's the Rwanda example. Very short time, they have lifted their people up from poverty, and also have lifted from poverty. I think we should study that example more than the foreign examples that are far away from Africa.
Okay.
Again, I'd like to say that the word love of people, love for the people, to be the paramount thing in government. Whether it is in the national or state assembly. If you love your people, you will invest on them. Love them like your own children, then you make all the difference. And you do that treating the people like their children? No, they are not. That's it.
Thank you very much, Chinedu Eke. Love for the people that our leaders don't love us. And he said we should even look at our African brothers, Rwanda, how they have transformed that country after the 1994 genocide and transformed the country into...
Rwanda is clearly another country that have lifted a lot of people out of poverty. But why we normally use China and India was that in the last 10 years, the largest number of poor people was in China, followed by India, and Nigeria was in third position.
So we want to do.
But in those 3 years, in those 15 years,
China, because they've lifted a lot of people out of poverty. India, because they've lifted Nigeria is now #1 position as hosting the largest number of poor people
by World Poverty Cup
in the world.
Very last call, sir. Let me bring this very last call. What's your name and where are you calling from? Oh, we lost that. Sorry, we won't be able to take your call again. Our time is up. So your last word, sir, on how to. The point is, how do we ensure good governance? You have told us citizen engagement, what leaders needs to do. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, the closing thoughts is really that from our experience in Nigeria, improving good governance, especially the normative aspects of it, the aspects of free and fair elections, of anti-corruption, of policing with human rights, of taking care of inclusion, of taking care of the poor and excluded, can only be championed by civil society. We've seen from our experience in Nigeria that both government and private sector are no longer prioritizing these normative issues. And it is the civil society that is always putting this on the front burner. And I want to encourage civil society to continue on that path and to encourage more people to join civil society in this movement, because in the final analysis, we need to bequeath to our children a better society than our parents bequeathed to us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Otive Igbuzo, the pharmacist turned bureaucrat, turned politician, pastor, everything all joined, At some point he was on the board of the Police Service Commission.
Yeah.
Yes, representing the civil society. He's a feminist. At some point he was in Women in Nigeria. You are still there, Abi?
Yes.
Anyway, so definitely you have to make a second coming like Jesus Christ. This edition will not say it all, because we are still going to take you on specifically on the issue of constitutional reform. I just wanted us to look at the kaleidoscopic issue of good governance, because without that we are just blowing out here. Thank you very much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
My regards to your family.
Thank you very much.
We wish you all the best as you continue your work as the chief of staff to the deputy president of the Senate. So that will be the size of the first discussion segment on this program. Please stay tuned as I welcome my second guest in a bit.